Okay, welcome back. I know it's been a while. I have to be honest, I kind of got discouraged with doing Jude the Obscure because it is so much work. And I just thought nobody's going to watch these videos. And what am I doing? And, this is that kind of crisis. And then I got to thinking, but, I mean, even if it's just a few people who end up getting something out of this and loving Thomas Hardy because of me, that's kind of a life purpose, right? So at any rate, I stopped last time, and I know I'm aging in front of you because those were really probably years ago when I did those videos, and I found them and I was like, oh, okay, they're still good. I haven't changed that much, just the hair. But at any rate, okay, so Jude and Arabella. Okay, so I had mentioned before that Arabella is like the archetype of the seducer. But I think she's also kind of, which is kind of similar, the archetype of the trickster as well. She always has something up her sleeve. And Jude is very gullible. You know, he doesn't have any experience really with a lot of friends, certainly not girlfriends. And this is really the first girl he meets that, he could date maybe, but people didn't really date that much back then. I mean, it was either, are we going to get married or not? What are we doing? So the next time they are together, Arabella's pigs run off, and Jude happens to be there around this time. It seems all too perfectly situated, but they end up running to go get the pigs, and they run up this hill, and then they find themselves alone. And you see this a lot in Victorian literature because, people, if they wanted to make out, you would have to go find some wooded area. I mean, you couldn't just do that in your bedroom. In fact, you shouldn't even be with someone at this age unchaperoned. And it kind of gives you an idea of what Arabella's parents are like, because she eventually gets them to just leave the house and let me have the house to myself. That's not something that would normally happen in these times. But it does happen with her, and again, she's doing this kind of cat and mouse game with him. Once they get to the hill, there's nobody there. Let me just read this passage to you. And then she toys with him and teases him. She's a major tease. They were in absolute solitude, the most apparent of all solitudes, that of empty surrounding space. Nobody could be nearer than a mile to them without their seeing him. They were, in fact, on one of the summits of the country, and the distant landscape around Christminster could be discerned from where they lay. But Jude did not think of that then. And if you think back, like, what happens right before Jude gets hit with some flesh on the head? He's thinking about being a bishop. And I'm going to come back to that idea because this is very important. This is not only saying something about Jude. This is saying something about the struggle of the Christian, the struggle of the flesh, like, because, Arabella is associated with the flesh, and the spirit, and later on you'll see that Sue Bridehead is associated with the spirit. And Jude is just like any of us, even though he's tragic. Like I've said before, you can't really blame the tragic hero because we make the same errors. We make the same mistakes. He's also a teenage boy. I mean, yes, he has good intentions, but he's never been presented with this kind of temptation before. And it's very tantalizing. So here they are, they're out of breath. Arabella's, falling to the ground, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, did I tackle you? She's dragging Jude along with her. And then she positions herself where she's saying, oh, you see, I see this caterpillar. Will you have to come closer to see it. Come. And Jude's really is looking for a caterpillar. And she's going, no, no. Yeah. And she's urging him. She's like a spider, you know. She's building her web. She's catching him. And he's just falling for it. And he says, well, maybe if I stand up, I could see it better. And this is the opposite of what she wants, of course. It's just, you stupid boy. And, you know, so she's obviously, you know, dragging him in, making him her own. And then he tries to kiss her. So you would think she'd be happy to kiss him, but no, 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 I'm not that kind of girl. And then Jude starts to doubt himself. Well, maybe I took too much liberty with her. What did I do? And so she's very good at manipulating this kind of play that she wants. So later she's having the conversation, I think, with one of her friends, and they're playfully teasing Arabella that, you know, Jude is off to Christminster. You know, he's leaving. And she says, have you heard that lately? Quite lately? Asked Arabella with a jealous, tigerish indrawling of a breath. She's becoming tigerish. She's very possessive of what she wants. And, you know, I said earlier that you really can't blame Arabella for the way she is, because she's a survivor. And I think if you put Arabella and Jude on Survivor, I think Arabella would definitely win. Because she's just a step lower than Jude. She has to. You see, when she kills the pig, she's ruthless. She doesn't care. She's not sensitive. She's lost all that sensitivity. All she knows is, I'm born in a certain class, and even though Jude's not, you know, that great, you know, he's still in the poor group too, he's a step up. And that would at least get her out of her parents' house. And, you know, for a young girl who feels stuck at home, I mean, if you don't marry, you're stuck with your parents forever. You can't just go work and live in your own apartment. You're going to be an old maid. So this becomes even more of a business. I would say that Arabella is very ambitious. And she knows that Jude is a sucker. And then she's going to get him. And so she kind of is starting to think about this plan of, well, I'm just going to have to do something to make sure he can't go. And so this is how, you know, she also arranges that her parents leave. And her parents are all for this because, I mean, it's a business transaction to them too. You know, they're not worried about it. I'm going to get this girl off my hands. And so when he gets there, she does something kind of odd. She puts an egg, as if she's hatching an egg, in her bosom area, and she's pulling it out in front of Jude. Now, most of you would probably not think this is very sexy. What is a live egg doing there? And Jude doesn't think it is. He says, well, this is kind of awkward, you know, and it would be awkward. But she makes a very telling comment when he says, why are you doing this? And she says, I suppose it's natural for a woman to want to bring live things into the world. And then she starts to play this game with him again. You know, the egg's here, you go find it. And then she lets go of the egg, and he says, you know, just let me kiss you and I'll go. Well, you have to catch me first. And she runs upstairs, and all it says, all you know, because of course Hardy isn't even going to go there. And this would have been obscene enough. Just the whole egg thing would have probably made people stop reading. But he just says that she rushed upstairs, whither Jude rushed at her heels. Now you have to make an inference from there. So in the next chapter, he sees her again, and this time he's actually really thought about it, and he's like, we need to have a talk because I'm going to go to Christminster. And she says, but I'm expecting. Oh no. And so Jude, being Jude, is going to do the right thing. You know, he's not going to run off and leave her. You know, and your reputation at this time, as you're going to see as the tragedy progresses, is very important. If you, at this time, you know, I think it was even Shakespeare that, you know, he got Anne Hathaway, it was not the actress, but yeah, Anne Hathaway was actually his wife. I believe that she was pregnant first, and this was something that you would have to stand in front of the church and confess to everyone about your sins. I mean, people really minded each other's business, and you needed a good reputation to get work, because, you know, let's say if he didn't marry her and people found out that she was unmarried and she had sex, well, she would be ruined. Nobody could marry her after that. Now, maybe somebody would that didn't care, but in the society, you're done after that. It's really kind of hard for us to see that, but we have to put ourselves in their shoes of what that looks like. So I want to read this passage to you. Okay, so he agrees that they're going to get married, and this is how he feels about it. That night he went out alone and walked in the dark, self-communing. He knew too well in the secret center of his brain that Arabella was not worth a great deal as a specimen of womankind. Yet, such being the custom of the royal districts among honorable young men who have drifted so far into intimacy with a woman as he unfortunately had done, he was ready to abide by what he had said and take the consequences. For his own soothing, he kept up a fictitious belief in her. His idea of her was the thing of most consequence, not Arbella herself, he sometimes said laconically. So he knows. I mean, and think about what I said about when I did my whole rant on narcissism. He knows the image that he has of her is not really her. And he's only going to find out that more and more. So they get married, and this is definitely a very facetious thing that Hardy says that you just kind of have to listen for in the book. It's almost, I might be weird, but I think it's, you know, funny when I read things like this. Maybe because I share some of the same sentiments as Thomas Hardy. But when they're getting married, and Hardy writes, and so standing before the aforesaid officiator, the two swore that at every other time in their lives, till death took them, they would assuredly believe, feel, and desire during the few preceding weeks. What was remarkable as the undertaking itself was the fact that nobody seemed at all surprised at what they swore. So in other words, you're going to a wedding, this young people who've only known each other for a few weeks are promising that the rest of their life they're going to feel and love each other till death do they part, and nobody sees anything wrong with that. Hardy does. This is Hardy definitely. He kind of likes to spoil those things for people. And I guess I do too, because at one time I upset a student and I heard her in the hallway talking about me, and she said, Miss Beck just doesn't believe in love. And I probably have a little more experience than her, but that's okay. I do believe in real love, but I do think, and I've gotten married when I was 21 the first time. It usually doesn't work out when you're young, you know, and it becomes hard. But, you know, notice, this is just a tiny bit of Marxist theory, don't get scared, but notice the environment and the situation and the class they're in making this decision. These things seem to happen more among people who don't have anything. And then so what do? They get married. And they think, well, we'll have, like even in today's world, okay, well, this will be better because then we'll have two incomes. But then you get pregnant. And then you get pregnant again. And all of a sudden, you're still stuck in the same place as you were when you started. So, there's a reason why, especially during this time, not so much. I mean, it doesn't matter what you think about it. In America, you could go either way, but in this time for sure, the class stayed in its class, and the upper class stayed in theirs. And that's why, like I've mentioned before, in a Jane Austen novel, the fairy tale is that the poor girl marries the wealthier guy. And instead of becoming an old maid, she becomes this, wealthy landowner wife, which is very likely not going to happen. But we like it when it ends that way. And they always end with the wedding. And Hardy shows you what it really is like after that wedding. And so this is how the marriage is showed after this romance. It's kind of symbolic. There's a couple of things that Arabella does and reveals about herself that was not true. For one thing, it's like, I don't know what they would have used during this time, but it's like she had hair extensions. And she just takes it out. And Jude says, "It's not your own." And at that moment, he just feels like disgusted with her. He feels betrayed. He feels deceived by this woman. And she's, well, I mean, this is the fashion. When I was a barmaid, you were a barmaid? I mean, that was not okay during this time either, for a woman to be doing something like that. And then later on, I've read, I don't know how many times I've read this, and I still am not sure exactly how she fakes her dimples. But she has some kind of suction thing that she's doing, and Jude sees it, and he just, it's just kind of a reminder of how she is just of the flesh, and there's not a real connection that Jude has with her. And whatever he imagined, whatever he had allowed himself to imagine, was with rose-colored glasses. And now he's taking the glasses off, and he's getting a good look at her. And that, of course, happens after marriage, because you live with each other day in and day out. And, when you're dating, you really do put up a good fight for being, an exceptional person. It gets tiresome trying to keep that up, though, and usually you get to see kind of the way it really is. So this is at the end of the chapter, but he brings up something I want to talk about. So let me just read this first, and then I'll talk about it. There seemed to him vaguely and dimly something wrong in the social ritual which made it necessary a canceling of well-formed schemes involving years of thought and labor, and foregoing a man's one opportunity of showing himself superior to the lower animals, and of contributing his units of work to the general progress of his generation, because of a momentary surprise by a new and transitory instinct, which had nothing in it of the nature of vice, and could only at most called weakness. Remember, in the Bible, the flesh is weak, but the spirit is strong. And this is, I just want to go to a journal entry, just to get into this theme a little bit more. This is not the only time that Jude is going to compare his passion to like an animal-like instinct. Okay? He made a mistake. We can all make mistakes like that, because he just got overly passionate. And you would think a man headed for Christminster, who a few minutes before meeting her wanted to be a bishop, would have it better in his head not to go there. It's like, sleep with sheep to the slaughter. That's exactly what happened. So I find it interesting. Like I was reading another article and came across this, and this is from a journal entry of Hardy's. We enter church and we have to say, we have erred and strayed from thy ways like lost sheep. When what we want to say is, why are we made to err and stray like lost sheep? Why would God make us in a way knowing we're sinful and then ask us not to sin? It's like that, in my question I put out there, it's, did God not know that Adam and Eve were going to eat the fruit? He had to have. I mean, he had to have known what he was getting with us, right? And this is something that really shows up a lot in Hardy's poetry. Is struggling with this. It's almost like he is almost a legalistic person. He wants to get it right, but I'm human. So why am I being set up for failure? And this is not a new question for Christians. I mean, even Romans 7, verse 2, St. Paul admits that he's got the same problem. He says, for what I am doing, I don't understand. For what I will do, that I do not practice. But what I hate, I will do. I'll do the very thing that I will, eat the very thing that I said this morning I was no longer going to eat. And I'll do it even if I think about it. And in fact, I'm more likely to do it if I think about how I should be dieting, right? And actually, St. Paul addresses that. He's like, that's what the law will do to you. It actually, the legalism will make you, so frustrated with yourself that you said, forget it completely. And, just to say something about Hardy and his so-called atheism that people believe in, and certainly people would read his poetry, or they would read this and they would think he's always attacking the church. He's attacking God. What a miserable atheist, Hardy, pessimistic person Hardy must be. But if you think about it, and this is just my personal opinion, but when I read this and I think about how much Hardy is struggling over the dark night of the soul, I have a really hard time believing that he's an atheist. Because to me, an atheist wouldn't care. Why would you care? I mean, you don't have to worry about, being good or not sinning or anything like that. And it's all a bunch of rubbish anyway, so what difference does it make? You don't have to concern yourself. And Hardy's obsessed with it. And I think that the people who really do struggle with their faith do have faith. That doesn't, just because you question it doesn't mean you don't believe. If anything, it means that you are committed to dig deeper into your own beliefs, no matter what religion you are, whatever you believe. That dark night of the soul, it's going to be a crisis, but there's going to be something else at the end of the crisis, and it's probably going to be like the Tennyson poem I've brought up, the Great Dark Night of the Soul poem In Memoriam by Tennyson, where he's an intelligent person. He has reason, but he compares the reason to freezing cold rain, okay? And his heart stands up to reason and says, but I have felt. And this is something the romantics ask, what about our feelings? What about our senses? Do they not mean anything? What is it within us that, is able to believe? And the way Paul reconciles this, which is not reconciled in this novel because it's not supposed to be, it's a tragedy. But Paul says, St. Paul, after in the Romans, he's talking about the law and justification and so forth. And he says by chapter 8, therefore there is no condemnation. And what Paul says is the answer is that, those who have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. And so that becomes the Christian solution, is that you're not sinning in the spirit. You're only sinning in the flesh. But if you notice, when I mentioned the letter killeth, that is inscribed in the beginning of the book, which is kind of, this is the verse. This is what we're talking about in this book. Hardy leaves out the second half of that verse. The letter killeth, but the spirit lives. He doesn't go to the New Testament at the end. He goes to the Old Testament. He goes backwards. So I may talk about that a little bit later and just talk a little bit about typology, because it's important to know these things. If you're going to study Western literature, it's good to know something about the Bible. It's just like knowing something about mythology. Why? Because allusions are made to it constantly, and it will help you dive deeper into these themes that Hardy wants you to see. Okay, I think I'm going to end with that, because it's a lot to take in. But, keep that in the back of your mind when you're reading this for yourself. Think about the struggle. Think about the religious struggle. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to have these problems, to be a person and think like Paul, why can't I do the things that I actually want to do, and the things I know I shouldn't do? Those are the very things I'm going to do. And when Jude does this, it's almost like he blames it on his animalistic instincts. And it sounds just like Hardy. Why was I born this way? Why should I have these kind of problems? So we'll continue that direction with the rest of it, because it only kind of builds from there. And then things are starting to get a little more interesting now. So hopefully you've stayed with it and you're still reading. So thank you. See you next time.